Hassan has had numerous solo and group exhibitions within Canada and internationally. Significant among them are Inscription at the Dunlop Art Gallery, Regina in 1990, and Aladdin's Gift at the Art Gallery of York University, 1996, and the Windsor Art Gallery in 1997. At the far edge of words, a touring exhibition surveying 30 years of her work was mounted by Museum London in 2009 and traveled widely in Canada, including to the Belkin Art Gallery at UBC and the Museum of Contemporary Canadian Art in Toronto. In 2012, the Art Gallery of Windsor mounted Reenacting Resistance, featuring remountings of key installation works from Hassan's career. Her works are included in private and public collections, including the National Art Gallery of Canada, the National Gallery of Canada, Ottawa, the Art Gallery of Ontario, Toronto, the New Museum of Contemporary Art, New York, and the University of Syria, hope I pronounced that right, in Baghdad. She received the Governor General's Award for the Visual Arts in 2001, and in 2012 was awarded the Canadian Council's for the Arts International Artist Residency in Paris. It is really our good fortune to have Jamelie here with us tonight. Please help me in welcoming.
Thank you very much, Colin, for that introduction. Thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you for the Visual Arts Department for inviting me to be here in the Art Now Public Speaker Series. And I do welcome this opportunity to speak, although I have to say that I may be a little shaky tonight, so forgive me if I am. Because, oh, forget it. I have these two fantastic people in my life. I had these two people in my life, and a lot of my work has to do with this family history and the kind of questions around cultural identity. So I'm introducing my talk with this portrait of my mom and dad, and it sort of draws on that whole kind of question of what is your identity, where are you positioned, and this is their wedding photograph from 1939, and it was taken in a studio in Zahle in Lebanon, which many years later I happened to be in that same town, and I actually saw the photo studio and went in and had a photograph of myself taken dressed like my mom, but I'm not showing you that tonight. So this is mom and dad, and their kind of relationship to identity, as you can see, was very fluid. Their relationship to their Arab and Muslim identity was very fluid. And their connection to Canada, also very fluid, but very strong. Often I'm asked, what kind of work do I do? I'm sure all of you as artists get that question when you're out there in the world moving around. People, oh, you're an artist, what kind of work do you do? I always find that a hard question to answer. More and more I find it a more difficult question to answer, because in fact my relationship to my art practice is very much driven by the questions that are happening around me, both intimate questions, personal questions, and also public questions, things that are happening in the world. By way of introduction, besides my parents and their influence and legacy, I want to speak as well to a scholar, Italian journalist, writer, and political activist, Antonio Branchi, whose dates are 1891 to 1937. He was very influential in my thinking. I've been trying to figure out exactly when I became conscious of Branchi's writing. I was a student in Rome in the late 60s, so that was a very radical period. I was there in 1967, and in 1968 I was in Beirut. So a lot of things were going on in that period in the late 60s. So I'm actually a child of a young adult, let's say. My formation is that period of the radical years of the late 60s. I grew up in a family of 11 kids. I'm number 7 in the middle, so I'm influenced by a multi-generational family. I'm also very influenced, as I said, this writer, Antonio Branchi, and that he was very, very strongly influential in my thinking around the early 1990s. I'm very conscious of delving very deeply into his writing at that time. His biography, his letters, his prison notebooks, they continue to hold a significant place in my library. Actually, last fall, Ron Benner, my partner, was there. We traveled to Sicily, to Ustica Island, which was the open-air prison where Branchi was incarcerated. It was one of the first prisons that he was incarcerated. He spent most of his writing life in prison. It's an astounding example, actually, of a writer, a political thinker, and his struggles against fascism. He was incarcerated by Mussolini in 1926 in Ustica. Ustica is a small island, and when we visited it, one of the things we did was do this walk around the island in honor of Branchi, thinking about him being in this prison. He also said that that was an enjoyable period of his life, to be in an open-air prison. And he continued to do education workshops and dialogues with other prisoners on the island of Ustica. One of the appeals for me for Branchi as a political thinker is his language has been of immense influence in the area of cultural studies. When we think of such terms today as, quote, the philosophy of praxis, or subaltern, or marginalization, we're talking that he's writing in 1926. These are terms that are very commonly found today in cultural studies departments all around the world. It's really significant to me as well that one of his major focus for Branchi was education, lifelong pursuit, and culture. He talked in the political context of what he was working and writing in. He talked about culture, and issues of culture are what lie at the heart of his revolutionary project. Branchi saw civil society as the public sphere. He wrote, "The challenge of modernity is to live without illusions and without becoming disillusioned." In other words, he did not, despite the hardship of his life, which was extremely difficult, he did not become a cynic. Even as a political prisoner, he continued to teach and have a circle of dialogue and debate within the prison walls throughout his entire 10 years that he was in prison, in various prisons throughout Italy. He saw social justice as a relational process. His was a lifelong struggle for a new politics of inclusion and overcoming marginalization. It is important for me to acknowledge in other ways, as I said, those that are closer to home, as I respond to this cultural imperative in terms of a legacy. And, just in terms of this idea of how Islam gets represented in the media in this period of time, in the post-9/11 period in particular, although it was way in advance of 9/11, where the stereotype around the Arab was prominent, and there's been a lot of studies on that. But what I like to pursue, and what I like to think about in terms of a kind of optimism, are certain philosophical principles that I was taught by my parents. And in part, this is about the care of the everyday, the concrete particulars of the everyday. The everyday over that abstract castle in the sky or castle in the air kind of way of approaching the world. So let us go on to that kind of space, which isn't really, this is basically a work that is Ron's garden in our site, our building here in London, Ontario at 514 Pond Street. And the project is called the Curing Pond. And as you can see, this is like the beginnings of this garden. And I was commissioned to do a project for the cancer clinic here in London at the hospital, and I was commissioned to do the children's treatment room. So as you can see, these images here are very playful, but in the middle of the project, they decided to change where that work was going to be located. And because of that change, I had to rethink what I was doing. And so I pulled those tiles from that site and decided to give them to this pond, which originally was a concrete pond. So you can see the ceramic tile around it. And these are, all the plants are medicinal plants. So what I actually did was a much more formal project for the cancer clinic. And that's it installed, and it's called 4 Rivers of Life. And it is actually inspired by an Islamic carpet, a prayer carpet. I've recently had the opportunity to see the original carpet in a collection in Paris at the Louvre, which was really quite wonderful to see the original carpet. So this here, you have a commissioned work. The monies for this project were raised by the doctors and hospital workers who saw this as an important aspect of being in the public space of the cancer clinic. So if you happen to be at the London Health Science Centre Victoria complex, that's where this work is installed. And that's a detail of the medicinal plants. So the stone is sodalite. It's very similar to lapis. I don't know how many of you had to go to the cancer clinic, but I know that a number of people have told me that the art is really important to them at the cancer clinic, and at that time they commissioned me as well as I think 8 or 9 other London artists, and then they also bought work. So as a collection, it's a really important aspect for people who are going through the hardship of an illness. So see the dramatic transformation over the decades from the first planting of the garden that Ron did, and today, this is like last summer. And then the movement around to the back part of the building, and we were able to acquire this back lot, which we decided to keep as green space. So throughout the site, there are different sort of embeddings of ceramics. And they're just sort of casual, playful kind of relationships that, from testing tiles and things like that I'm working on, that have been, I decided to kind of present in different ways in the garden. So there's inspired by an Egyptian cushion, and back to the front. Now, I've also had the opportunity to work with King's University College and that campus, and this was the beginning of, this was the poster actually announcing the initiative and the idea around having a project which is going to be a temporary project. So King's Keon, In and Out of Place, it has a really fascinating story, and I'm going to go through this with you just as an example of what can happen with a public artwork in your own community, where it became somewhat controversial because someone took against the work. The person that took against the work was actually a former professor, a professor emeritus at King's, who decided that he didn't particularly like the politics of, I think actually he didn't particularly like my politics, and he didn't like what this work represented within the context of the campus. It started as a temporary outdoor public project, and as you can see, there were lots of different. Now this was in the Gazette, but it also was in the National Post, and there were letters, lots of discussion and debate. And one of the things that I decided at the time of doing the piece was that I was not going to actually engage in a debate with the people who went against the work. That I would just let them do that the work would speak for itself, and that others would defend it. That I wouldn't actually engage in that. And it was interesting because I got that advice from my friends and my family, who said that the work speaks for itself, and you're inside a community, and those people who are against the work are going to have to deal with the kinds of language that they're using to stereotype this particular work as a public work. So this was Professor Klatt. He wanted to get into a big debate with me, which we decided not to do. And even there were cartoons about it, and the whole thing around what was the calligraphy. And what did it say? Well, it actually said Keon. And it was inspired by the site, by the architecture, and by the function of the idea, because I was thinking of, in Arabic, a word that started with a K. That's how it was a simple thing. We were driving up to Ottawa, and I said, I want to do something with the letter K. And so I started thinking K, you know, kings and a K, you know, it was very basic. And then I realized, well, my youngest grandson's name is Keon. And so I started thinking about what was the meaning of Keon and how that, as a name, moves through many, many cultures. Keon is also a Celtic name. Keon is an Arabic word. Keon is a Persian name. So there were all these. Keon, I found, is also a name that we find in Malaysia. So, you know, when the headline said Keon's not welcome at King's, it was like sort of pointing to any kid who had the name Keon. And Platt's critique of it was that this was and got picked up by the National Post, was that this was a Catholic college. So what was a Catholic college doing having an Arabic inscription on its wall? And that's Keon at night. How many people have actually seen this installation? Very, handful, yeah. So it was originally on this wall, the facade, as a temporary project, and it subsequently they decided to buy it. It was never intended to be a permanent installation. It came out of the dialogue and the conversations around the piece that the principal at King's at the time decided that they would acquire this work, and they built a garden, and it's now installed in the courtyard of this garden at King's. I also think that the location for installation work is very dependent on this idea of hospitality. The site becomes hospitable to the work, to receive the work. And in this case, I mean, what larger statement could there be than the principal and the staff mobilizing to acquire the work and to work with community members to want that work and to buy the work. So that was a nice thing that happened in 2007, totally unexpected, and largely, I mean, I think that's one of the things that you're involved in, thinking through an idea conceptually, and you're thinking, oh, well, it's a temporary project, what the costs that are involved in installing something that might be up for at the most 6 weeks, perhaps 2 months. But if you really feel strongly about a work, I mean, obviously you want to realize the work and see what it would look like, how it would respond to that site. So against the, this sort of like potential for like the problem that might emerge, and I never imagined that it would be considered to be as problematic as it was. And even some people said to me, people who I like and are close to me said, that piece is really subversive. And I thought, well, I've always liked subversion and subversive work. So I took that as a compliment. And this whole notion that was a symbol of Muslim dominance over Christianity. That was the language that was being used, or that political correctness had become the secular religion of our time. Well, those were some of that's the phraseology that was being thrown around at that time. Many of my projects have reflected on the cultural space of the Middle East and the legacy. Well, that's the blank wall before the piece was installed. And I used that in the background for the neon. So there's this combination of photography and neon, which then creates a trace of its earlier history of it being located on that wall. So I was preparing myself for the potential that piece would not stay on that wall. So I don't know if you can make out that in behind the neon, there is the image of the wall. See that? So I was mentioning the influence of Edward Said. He's another thinker, very prominent in my readings and thinking. making and continue to have a very strong impact. And this is a quote that was circulating and is actually part of the didactic information at King's on the label. And I'll read it to you. Rather than the manufactured clash of civilizations, we need to concentrate on the slow working together of cultures that overlap, borrow from each other, and live together. But for that kind of wider perception, we need patient and skeptical inquiry, supported by faith in communities of interpretation that are difficult to sustain in a world demanding instant action and reaction. And that's from Edward Seed. Oh, how did we get there? Okay. So, some of you may remember this piece. This is it in the working on it in the lot behind our studio building. And here you can actually see the scale of the blanket or the carpet or the blanket, the cover for the Holy Roller tank at Victoria Park. And Anna Whistlebrand, who's here tonight, she was among the people who volunteered to help weave those silk poppies. There's 4,000 of them that were woven into the camouflage netting. So this is showing it to you on the ground in progress. And I sort of see this work as a work that is part of methods and processes, and what Said refers to as, quote, the tumult of our times. And it's also a cultural project that is orientated towards social transformation. And that is what you see ultimately is, I love this, that bundle. I actually like the work as a bundle. Like, I like it rolled out and I like it as a bundle, but here is Ron and Paul Wald, who many of you know from his years teaching here, and Zoe, his daughter, is they're going to unfurl the poppy cover onto the tank. I grew up walking by that tank at Victoria Park, and as a kid, and then, my own son grew up, and it's a landmark tank from World War II. And there it is. The military had to give permission for the poppy cover to be on the tank, which is interesting for me was that it actually did involve a significant dialogue with the military. And, some people were critical of the work because they thought, well, if the military, members of the military like it, then how can it be good? And so, there's this whole sort of thing, like you're walking around Victoria Park with the military and visiting the other artists' work. And so this whole thing around being in this companionable relationship with a member of the military. But it was, I sort of think of Gayatri Spivak and what she used to say way back in the 90s in terms of feminist practice. And she'd say, well, you have to imagine working in the most difficult situation possible. And if you try to find that most difficult place and go there and work, then that is where you try to imagine your practice. If you can actually realize it, that's a whole other thing. But you can at least begin to think about who does your work speak to and how would you engage in that very difficult. And it was a real revelation, actually, to have those conversations with members of the military who had been in Afghanistan, who actually saw the work as something that was significant to their time and their relationship to war. And that they needed that acknowledgement in terms of who they were as soldiers who had gone to Afghanistan. And now when we see how many soldiers who are suffering from post-traumatic syndrome and suicides, we understand, that it's not a monolith. The military is made up of so many individuals, each with their own struggles. Yes, I see the piece as one that challenges and questions military actions. And at the same time, I'm empathetic to the families who've lost their family members. So I'm just going to kind of take you through this briefly. I love this too. Now the thing is like a lot of kids really like to climb that tank, and one of the things the military liked about the blanket, the cover, was that it stopped you from climbing. There are pragmatic sides to a lot of art. I mean, and that was really interesting because they saw kids climbing on the tank as disrespectful. So, just in terms of the relationship of activism and large-scale public projects, I've worked from like these particular contexts to billboards, to postcards, to bookworks, to exhibition spaces. And I see each one of them as having a various potential to be interpreted and to be part of a dialogue. And ultimately, hopefully, part of a process of social transformation to reach audiences beyond the gallery or the museum. So here it is as a work floor, partially unrolled. And in the background is a piece called Could We Ever Know Each Other? This work presents aspects of my work that reflect on issues related to cultural values and the military and Canada's role in international conflicts, issues that have previously been examined in my work. Inspired by a quote from the Canadian writer Gabrielle Roy, the full quotation was on the former Canadian $20 bill. If any of you have got an old $20 bill, and you examine it, you will read the whole quote, which is, could we ever know each other in the slightest without the arts? This quote, combined with the image of the Haida-inspired sculptural works by Bill Reid on the former $20 bill, made a strong statement regarding the role of Canada and the celebration of Indigenous values. This $20 bill was recently taken out of circulation and has been replaced by a $20 bill that presents images that instead celebrate the role of Canada's military history, from the naming of highways to war museums and monuments to the new Canadian dollar bill. Canadians are witnessing an increasing valorization of the military in our country and the security apparatuses that increasingly are present in our everyday lives. The poppy cover reflected on the conflict of war, the World War II war, and Canada's recent role in Afghanistan. And as I said, it was an invitation to be part of a public project in Victoria Park through Lola, curated by Paul Wald. I mentioned the 4,000 poppies and the camouflage netting. Interestingly, the camouflage netting came from Sweden. There was a lot of discussion about being able to reinstall the poppy cover at different times, but that hasn't happened. So, it's bundled up in storage in my place, and when I had the opportunity to show it as a carpet in the gallery at Sir Wilfrid Laurier, I took that opportunity. And what we also see on the wall, which you don't see here in the image, is a digital frame which shows it as it was originally shown on the tape. So Gabrielle Roy reminds us what we lose in our relationships to diverse cultures, including Indigenous values and a tradition of peacekeepers. Further, the $20 bill is a question that reminds the viewer that it is through culture that we communicate who we are and gives us a sense of place, and that we must continue to engage with and value the arts and its role in defining our country. So this is a recent installation of the Baghdad Billboard from the 1990s, and it's circulated quite extensively. It was acquired by the Belkin Art Gallery as part of their permanent collection, which is really unusual and a radical move on the part of the curator to acquire a work that's actually a billboard. The work was initially commissioned by Art Site and Artist Run Center in Windsor. The curator was Lorenzo Bui. And I mean that it has done all these different sort of like situations of being exhibited and with postcards, and it's traveled extensively. And here it is on a wall in Mönchengladbach in Germany. And it's on the wall faces the entrance to the museum. And at the time that they installed it, they thought that, you can see the graffiti on the wall, they thought that it would become covered in graffiti. But they recently wrote to me and said that, to their surprise, nothing has happened. No graffiti. There's actually plants growing up, so they think even the dogs are respecting the billboard. No, I know, it's kind of funny. But originally, this billboard was hand-painted, but now it's photographically reproduced. And because there wasn't the city of Baghdad is a reference to 1001 Nights and the Arabic phrase kan wa makan. It's the beginning of a story, how you tell a story, that this whole relationship to truth and fiction and setting up the narrative. The photograph, the original photograph I took in Baghdad in 1979 when I was a student at the University of Wisconsin, struggling my way through Arabic courses, which did not go that well. And so this is the other work that was installed in Belkin, and is an adaptation, another version of, did I show this one? No, of Noon, which was on the cover of my publication that the Museum London and the Belkin produced. And so the gallery wanted to do another version of this for outdoors. So we negotiated with the Belkin, who also owns this work. And it's installed here, and that fog, that's another artwork. That's by Robert Morris. So the work is installed on the exterior of the museum, and I just love this photo. They sent it to me recently, and it really has a very powerful kind of presence in that city, which is about the same size as London, a very strong regional art center. Joseph Beuys had his first solo exhibition in this museum. Not that particular site, it was moved later. This is a Hans Hollein star architect type building. It's an extraordinary collection, including the Joseph Beuys. When they installed my work inside the gallery, in the museum, they kept a lot of the collection up. So adjacent to each of our works, it's a group exhibition, were works from the collection. So they didn't dismantle the permanent collection to install. They actually did this relationship of the contemporary artworks. So that's the end of those visual images. And I think we might have time to either have questions now, or we could just go straight to the video and then have questions after.
She was a sister, a kind and caring sister to unprivileged and helpless people of the world. She lived as a photojournalist, which means she captured the images of pain and despair and presented them to us without interference or interpretation. In her short life, she was the witness without silence or force. Tonight, we will pay our tribute to her by being her voice that was silenced.
Sister, speak to me of your words when stars are not shining. Speak to me of your words when stars are not shining. Your fingers stretch in my hands the petals of spring roses. You're decoded to me in roses through walls standing between us, standing around us. Sister, shining stars, speak. Speak to me of your words when stars are not shining. The body of a woman in the coffin is the body of the same woman in the frozen lake of bitter waters.
She was taken away by some guards, reportedly branded as spy, and assaulted and tortured by interrogators. June 24th. She was reportedly beaten into a coma, then taken to a hospital with a brain hemorrhage and, according to some reports, with a broken skull. Friends who saw her through a plate glass window at the hospital said that she had severe cuts and bruises on her face and head. July 6th, 7th, and 9th, Canadian officials visited her in the hospital but were not allowed to get close to her, nor did they get a clear picture of her medical condition. These visits were demanded by Ms. Kazemi's mother, who had to rush to Canadian Embassy in Tehran to seek help for her helpless daughter. July 12th, Ms. Kazemi dies in the hospital while under guard. She was not kidnapped in the street by some paramilitary forces. She was arrested at Evin prison, which I would rather call it the Bastille of Iran.
On July 11th, our organization mourned when we learned Zahra Kazemi was declared brain dead from her injuries. Today, added to our anger and sadness, is determination. Determination to pressure the Canadian government to make every possible effort to force the Iranian government to bring those accountable to justice. The Iranian government must allow the return of Zahra Kazemi's body to Canada in accordance with the wishes of her son, so that an independent autopsy can be conducted to establish the full truth about what happened to this journalist. Zahra Kazemi was a photojournalist doing her job, yet she was arrested, suffered brutal injuries, and died from those injuries. Unfortunately, Zahra Kazemi is not the only journalist to suffer at the hands of the Iranian government. As we speak, there is at least 22 journalists imprisoned in Iran. 14 of them were arrested in the last month. Justice for Kazemi is not just about bringing those responsible for her death to trial. It is about preventing what happened to her from happening to others. We especially call on the Canadian government to forcefully press Iran to allow the return of Ms. Kazemi's body to this country. This case must not be allowed to disappear. All Canadians must demand justice on behalf of Kazemi.
Nobody has the right to snuff away the skills and the dedication. And for her to show the courage of doing that dangerous work is a very, very important thing to our society. And when we mourn her and we mourn those other journalists who were killed during the recent war in Iraq, who were doing their job of trying to tell the world about a truth that some did not want to hear. That's what we're here for tonight, my sisters and my brothers. And I want to wish you the solidarity of working people so that we can say that her sacrifice is not in vain.
Speak to me of your words when stars are not shining. The body of the woman in the coffin is the body of the same woman in the frozen lake of bitter waters. The walls stand and stand. The ice stands and stands. Nothing moves. Let me carry you out to the sands, to the heat of the sun. Let me watch your rebirth from the ice. Let me see you walk and talk. Sister, shining stars, speak. Speak to me of yourself when stars are not shining.
We'll have a question and answer period. If you have questions or things you'd like to ask, jump in and raise your hand. I guess. Yeah.
In the beginning, when you showed the pictures of the home and the pool and then the cancer side, then you moved on to, let's say, more open events, you seem to suggest to me, and I believe this is true, but you can either elaborate on it or disagree, that there's a connection between how you live in your own environment and also your interaction in the world, that they're kind of like in sync with one another in terms of entireness, I suppose, that your action is also contained in your environment and the way you want your environment to be, and then your action is contained in the exterior world in the way you like the world to be in as well. So is that plausible?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are obviously certain sort of ways that one needs to have work that allows you to kind of shift gears. So, you know, there are works that are really about another kind of practice in a way, but they're all tied up together. Because that glazing and repeating, so the relationship of the way of working, the process of working where it's labor intensive and you're doing something that might take quite a while to produce, and then there are other things where it's a lot faster. Like for instance, we didn't plan to do this film work. It was really done simply because Tyson had his camera with him and kept filming while we were at the tribute, and as we were driving back we decided that we had footage and we had something that would be worth making into a work. And it was used as a way of getting visibility for her situation at that time, and involved dialogue with Stefan, her son, to get the photos. So I mean, there are certain kinds of work that are quieter, more reflective, as you know, appear to be really about just recharging in a certain kind of way, and to tackle other sorts of things. So you sort of, you know, there are these relationships to family, to parents, to children, to that all kind of wrapped into what helps to make that work happen. So there's this, my desire on my part is that it's a collective project. That a good part of what I do is part of me, but that part of me that is connecting. And then there's obviously the times when, you just need to step back and reflect. And so that environment that we are able to have, and that's sort of another political position. We were talking about that earlier, about how artists can take that position to save space, to create another kind of space, and to work with others in the city to kind of care about the environment, or to care about those kinds of larger issues that everybody deals with in their everyday. So I certainly think that there's a practice of the everyday that's going on in my work pretty much all the time. So there's not really a separation from that very personal, private life and what's going to next charge a particular work. So, and sometimes, it's a little bit, where, in the case where Tariq was the reason why I became so involved in the Zara Kazemi case, because he was working for, he was working at Canadian Journalists for Free Expression when that case happened. So he's speaking actually in the capacity that he had. So he's my son, so there's that tie in there. Reza Bariani was a political human rights activist poet who I had admired for like 2 decades, and had his writing in my library. And when I saw that he was going to be one of the speakers as well, I was motivated to go and be at that vigil. And also because of the issue, here was this woman, mother, dual citizenship, in this horrific situation where she lost her life. And as the labor person said, she was doing her job. And it's happening more and more, and not just in Iran, but obviously in other countries, where journalists and photojournalists are at grave risk doing this kind of work. So I think it's a form of solidarity, which is what that piece is about, where you hear the story from these different people and you piece it together, and then you actually get the narrative of what happened to Zara and how she lost her life, and how important it was on the part of the family to try to bring her body back to Canada, why that was important to them, and how, so that's a really immediate thing, how we relate to that. Like, death is such a grave and ultimate thing that happens in everyone's life. And so here in this case is the son who is trying to mobilize he can't release his mother anymore. She's gone. So what is he trying to accomplish here is to honor his mother, to bring her back to be buried in Canada. So, it's a very heart-wrenching, tragic story of a Canadian woman journalist who was working in Iran at that time, had family in Canada and family in Iran. So it's a situation that I think is very representative of a lot of people working today. So so you get that whole kind of relationship of like where she's showing the everyday. You're seeing like these, from these very school kids, going to school to all these different situations where she photographed at the end of the footage. So yeah, it's a good point. Thank you, Kim.
I couldn't help but notice you talked about the movement. So first of all, traveling is a big thing. You talked about the movement from the Palestinian Children's Hospital to the sections. You're going to change that. You're contending with the rolling of the poppies and just the big I don't even know the name of it now, the billboard. And so I was wondering if movement of a piece for you is something that's important, or if that just is a coincidence that kind of comes through.
That's an interesting observation. I hadn't really thought about it.
Do you want me to speak up?
It's So this notion of travel and movement, so the movement of Jamelie herself as a traveler, and how that influences her artistic practice, and then the billboard, the rolled up poppy camouflage, how that moves between sites and spaces. So it was just an observation on the theme. And how you
That actually happens with the work taking a different, and it gets not only moved, but it actually, you're referring to, once it moves, it's moving and changing at the same time. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think that notion of, it's a little bit different in this context. I see what you're saying, and I think that's an astute observation, because I never really thought of it. But I think it has to do with also my desire to be flexible, to have the work have an audience in different ways, and also experiment and be open to that. And also, I mean, the context. I mean, like, when I take on a situation like the children's cancer treatment space, to me, that was a different thing than the foyer of the hospital. And at the time, there was no pressure on me to actually shift that here, you know. So that, in India, we had a friend who, every time she moved, she used to say, we're shifting. We're shifting, and I always really like that term to use, because it really does emphasize that relationship, that you do make a shift. You shift gears, something happens in that movement. And certainly, I think, obviously, anyone who's traveled, that definitely happens to them. And you can imagine what it's like when someone travels when they're really young and they go to another country, and how much of a shift that is. So, yeah, I think that's really an interesting observation as well. Thank you.
So, I can see it, and I can relate how your work is related with culture, with politics, history. But despite all the challenges that you have had, especially with the King's project, what theme do you specifically like most?
What
And
theme do I
so like
specifically
the
like
theme,
most?
like the cultural, the work, or sort of which one do you like most more?
Well, I think this goes back to what Kim was saying, is that it's all kind of woven, is like a strand of this that moves over to this, and it doesn't really get separated. So I don't really have an area of work that, I mean, I think, what I'm saying about the fact that she can't, for me anyway, I'm not always on for the hard task that's in front of you. So that's just admitting that you can't do it all. You just have to do what you can do. And you can only do it the best to what you can do at that given time. And if the resources are there for that you can do it, then it's great. You get to do it. If the resources aren't there for you to do it, then you make a choice. Put your own resources and energy into making it get done if you have means enough to do that. And that's actually what happened with Keon, is that in that situation, it was a process of dialogue with a lot of people that led to it becoming a piece that then got acquired. And so it's the unexpected. You can't really know what's going to happen with the work. And then there are other pieces that I've done in the past that, I love those pieces, but they're not necessarily going to get shifted. And that, I think, is a really difficult thing for artists to have to deal with. It's the work that just ends up not having a site, not having a place to be exhibited and to be thought about by other people. And so the amount of work that we all have to put in storage or think about, like, that's a whole other area that I don't even want to go there. Because it's better to think about the work that is actually out there and giving something to other people. And that's why I wanted to, show you what happens to a project that changed. I didn't give it up. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I just said, okay, but you're not getting that piece, you're getting this piece. And I like them both. And I'm happy that I have the one in our garden and the other one at the cancer clinic. And so I had the means to, at the time, to be able to do that. Did that answer your question? Okay.
It seems like your work, all of it is dealing with issues of healing, and trying to help others heal, and just trying to get like a better notion of you and where that's coming from in your own being.
Oh, did everyone hear that? The comment was that my work seems to deal a lot with healing, the idea of healing, and where is that coming from? And could I expand on that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just like, is there a place
I think that's a
within you
good
that-
observation. I think a lot of art is about that. That it's not necessarily therapeutic, you know, but it's certainly, creative work is a good healing space to be in, doing your creative work. So I've seen a lot of people who have a lot of issues and difficulty, but if they're working, they're happy. You know, and artists are like that. If they're, you know, it's like one of those things that if you're not working, you're depressed somehow. Like it kind of is a funny sort of weird space. Is that the happy person is the person who is working and working on their work and just feels a great amount of, you know, satisfaction and excitement from seeing work get realized. So, you know, I think that, yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think the fact that that one particular piece is in a hospital setting also lends itself to that kind of reading. But I remember I went through a period where I had some injuries, and my doctor told me about how looking at water and fish and that sort of thing would be really good for me. And I started doing a whole lot of watercolors that had to do with that pond, you know. So I mean, sitting there and just having this routine was a really good thing for me to recover and get better, physically get to physically get better by working through that and looking at nature and that connection to nature, which is very important to my work. So although it may not be that very obvious, I mean, I don't know how obvious it is, but I mean, I like trees and I like nature, so I think that's a really important part of being able to live in London. I mean, that's a real privilege to live inside the city where you're surrounded, many of us, by the natural world in a very big way. And so I'm very sensitive to that. It's one of the things I love about London. Like I can just go for walks and walk, you know, and just actually zone out, and that becomes a really good way for me to do my creative thinking, just to walk in the city, and just even if it means just walking around the block, because the trees are so big here, and there's just so much. Not right now. I mean, it's kind of cold. It's been a long winter for a lot of people, but no, I think that's again a very good observation. There's more to that story for sure. Thank you.
Mine's more of a statement sort of about the moving and shifting question. And it pertains to an article I read in the Toronto Star a couple of years ago that looked at Catholic schools in the GTA and whose Muslim student population was skyrocketing. And in interviewing parents, they learned that parents preferred that their kids to have a faith-based education, even if it wasn't their faith.
Right.
So when I think of that in respect to Keon's reception in London, perhaps it should just shift to Mississauga.
Well, there are a lot of Arab Muslim students at King's.
Oh,
That is
really?
true. That is true. And one of the reasons why they felt there was a real need to address that. And since that piece was done, they have established a position of Islamic studies at King's. So, I mean, sometimes, you know, it's a modest move that starts a whole kind of rethink. And I can't take credit for that, but I certainly can think that it started something. And, you know, and I think that's Keon College also has a chair of Islamic studies now. So the faith-based aspects of University of Western Ontario do now acknowledge that this relationship to Islam and its relationship to this university is something that needs to be brought into the curriculum. And that's a really good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really good thing. So a lot of people have asked me about what were the concrete effects of a certain work. Could you point to something in your work that there is a concrete particular result? And I mean, I don't think that's my particular job to argue that, but I think that's a good example. I think, yeah. Would you think? Yeah. But I don't want to take credit for it because I think that's wrong to take credit for something in that way because I think it's all part of the process. Because you have to have the people together working on something to make that happen. Because I'm not part of that, you know, the whole sort of market system, you know, that part of it, of the world where you carry that kind of weight with your work in terms of dollars. So what you've got is what is referred to as cultural capital. That's what we've got.
Any other questions? Reaching people in the back? Like maybe, are you guys able to hear the questions in the back? Or, no? Okay. So I'll try and summarize them, or one of us can maybe summarize it.
So I was gonna, you just sort of talked about the question I was gonna ask, which I thought maybe you wanna talk about or not, but since you sort of brought it up, maybe you do. You take a different path as an artist, and I think it's important for people to understand that the path that you can take as an artist is not necessarily the path that you see so frequently, which is to, you know, get a dealer, show big museums, sell your work, etc. I mean, frequently enough we get artists here who are discussing those kinds in their own way. I'm not trying to be derogatory, that kind of path. But you take an alternative path. I don't think I know if you've ever had a dealer or not. I don't think so, but I could be wrong. And that path, and yet you've been able to function as an artist, both economically and showing different places, etc. And I'm just interested in you talking about that a little bit, if you want, because I think it's important.
Mm-hmm. Well, I did have a dealer briefly in Toronto, Yarrow Salzman Gallery, and I show occasionally with Tilson Gallery. I have an informal relationship with them. I never had worldwide representation in any gallery. I have been approached by galleries for that kind of representation, but I didn't think it was really viable for me. Because at that point, I mean, if you're you're selling in a certain context, by choice, being here in London, Ontario, you're going to be selling in a very modest way, I think, in terms of like collectors in London, Ontario, and you're going to also try to sell works to institutions out of London, Ontario, to those institutions, and then try to get the work international. So, I mean, one of the things that Ron, Banner, and I have done over the years is try to also not necessarily think about our work in terms of selling, but in terms of building those kinds of community exchanges that take us from London, Ontario to other locations internationally. And in various ways that has been, you know, a really satisfying way of working over all these decades. I mean, I continue to be very, you know, excited about different possibilities in that, working in that way. And I don't really see what I have to offer a dealer. I don't really see that. So I occasionally have like smaller works that you can buy, and those sell. So why would I give 50% of that to the dealer when I already know that I'm going to probably sell those pieces? And sometimes, you know, and this is a true story. This has all been true before. But I had a situation where a relative of mine went to a dealer and bought my work when he could just as easily have come to my studio and bought my work. And now, what is the advantage of that? The advantage of that is that it supports the dealer to stay in the city to do the selling of local art in London, Ontario. So that I like. What is the other advantage? It tells that market world that's the market value of that work. If it's not visible in that commercial market at some point, it's really hard, as you know, for them to get an appraisal value of the work if it doesn't sell. There's got to be a record of sales at some point in your career. There has to be some degree of sales. although there could be not much, it could be commission, it could be any number of ways of showing that record of sales. So from time to time, it is important to have that. But I'll say that it's really unusual where a curator actually approaches you and says they want to buy that work. There's a few of you here, James, Judith, who have done that, said, we want to buy that work from you. And recently I had it happen. It's always a shock when that happens because it doesn't happen very often. It's usually where the artist is trying to get the institution, as you know, interested in buying the work. And it's, that's the role that the dealer could take for you if they're able to do that. But it doesn't seem that dealers are particularly good at selling installations. So that's the dilemma, I think, for people who do the kind of work that, doesn't really fit in any particular genre, that it's kind of all over the map. And so, I sell my watercolors and drawings and things like that, or smaller neon pieces, private collectors here in the city. That happens, and outside the city. But for instance, if I were to donate a work in Vancouver or Toronto, it would go for a much higher price in Toronto and Vancouver than it would in London, Ontario. And that what they'll say to me in Vancouver is that your prices are, if you were to want to talk about prices, your prices are way lower for what you've accomplished than, relative to other people who are out there in the market. So really, I just want to keep my prices relative to who could buy my work, so that my work is out there. I'm not really particularly interested in those. Ron and I were recently in the Gulf States, and Qatar, and the kind of money that is available for contemporary art. We're talking $1 billion a year for contemporary art in the art market in Qatar. It's incredible. That's the government. That's incredible. To just even imagine the scale of that amount of money floating around in Canada, just Canada, is incredible to our minds, right? $1 billion. So, there's scales of situations, I think, that you have to get a kind of realistic perspective on where you're working from, what makes sense in terms of making things work for. And I think that a lot of good artists have been able to do really well living and working in London, Ontario, because of the collective nature of the community. And, the important collectors that are in the city, and how the institutions are willing to mobilize with artists and nonprofits, and, just a whole range of things that go on here in London that I don't think there's too many places that can compare. So that's my pitch for working in London. Stay in London and make something happen here, keep things happening here, and making that commitment to a place where, again, I want to evoke my mother here, because as many of you know, she passed away recently, and she was the one who always said to me, I don't get it, why don't you buy something? Why don't you're spending all this money fixing up warehouse spaces that are owned by other people, when you could actually buy something and fix it up and own it yourself. And I thought that would be a huge burden to do that. Why would I want a mortgage? Why would I want obligations? I would have to stop traveling. I wouldn't be able to do this or that. And as a matter of fact, to tell you the truth, it actually enabled a lot more things to happen. So I think, that whole kind of question of, well, then when you do that, you're actually saying to the place that you're living in that what you're bringing to this place is important, and therefore should be valued and by everyone else around you, and then you can sort of do more things that way. Because I can remember going to City Hall to try to get them to reverse, they wanted us to pay $60,000 for, what's it wrong? Parks and Recreation. There's a Parks and Recreation tax on our building because of the scale of our building. And had we had to do that, there would have gone our budget to renovate this building. And so we had to go and appeal it. And when we went in to appeal it, there were all these developers there who were there doing their appeals, people who we actually knew. And they thought we were there to protest what they were doing. Because we were so known as like just always protesting. And we said, no, actually we're here for an appeal as well. so it's interesting, you know. And I think that, you know, you can kind of say, okay, well now you're in that weird position of being viewed as a developer. And you're not a developer, of course. You don't have those resources, but somehow the city, the bureaucracy can put you in there, and it can become a very irrational thing. So, you know, there's the fight against that as well to make it work. And we actually won that appeal because it was preposterous. I mean, that we would have to pay it. So I think that there's a lot of sort of lessons that in each step of the way of establishing a kind of studio, building the residence here in London, which led to more and more things for us to be able to do. When I say us, meaning Ron and myself. So it's obviously a partnership, and thank you, Ron. I don't know if I say that often enough, but he also makes really good coffee. So that's it. Well, thank you, everybody.